After more than 2 years of civil war, the airport in Sudan's capital was supposed to reopen today.
That now looks like it's going to be delayed even further.
I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. In Denmark, a library where you can check out humans to talk to.
I am a literal open book. I will answer any and all questions, and I'm not going to get offended.
Plus, a rock radio station in Ukraine that's a lifeline for the troops.
It is very important for them that the station that they used to listen when they were civilians supports them.
And a musician from Cuba goes deeper into Cuban music after he moves away.
You pay more attention to the details about the music. You are mixing your roots and your tradition with my new life.
That's all ahead today on The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday.
The airport in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum was supposed to reopen today, a bit of hope in a country where civil war has produced the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth. But a series of drone strikes dashed that hope and kept the airport closed.
Khartoum was recaptured by the Sudanese military back in March, but evidently it is still beset with violence. Kholoud Khair is the head of Confluence Advisory, a think tank founded in Sudan. She spoke with us today from Nairobi, Kenya, and started by explaining why the reopening of Khartoum's airport has been delayed.
Well, there have been a series of drone strikes over the past week. The ones that hit the airport were launched on Monday and Tuesday, with most of the damage taking place on Monday. Today, Wednesday, was meant to be the first flight landing back into Khartoum International Airport, first consumer flight. And that has now been scuppered, which was exactly the intention. The RSF has not taken responsibility for the drones, but it's almost certainly their doing. This is in large part because they had been making threats really over the past few months to say several things. One, that they have not left Khartoum just because they were defeated in Khartoum in March. And secondly, that they would be making their presence felt in Khartoum. And we've also seen them, of course, hit different military targets across the river in the twin city of Durman as well.
I'm curious, if the airport had reopened in Khartoum, what would that have meant? Like cargo planes arriving with food, ability for people to leave, if that was even doable?
The intention was for the civilian flights to land, and these would mostly be domestic flights from Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast back into the center, the geographic and political center in Khartoum. So mostly it was going to be civilian flights of those who want to return to Khartoum. The Sudanese armed forces have been urging many people to return, and about over 1 million have returned. Now, the difficulty for a lot of people who have returned, of course, is that there are no services, there are no schools really with full functionality, very few hospitals, you can count them on one hand, that are still reasonably functioning, very few medical supplies. Some of the markets have reopened, but not enough to service an entire city. This reopening of the airport was meant to signal the return of Khartoum as a political and economic capital, though that now looks like it's going to be delayed even further.
So other than these drone strikes on the airport, how safe is it for Sudanese citizens still living in Khartoum day to day? Like, what have you heard from contacts there?
Well, it depends on who you are and where you are. Unfortunately, this war has ethnicized a lot of the public discourse, which means that people who come from certain parts of the country, for example, the west, southwest, and southern parts of the country, have not had the same kind of welcome in Khartoum as people from other parts of the country, say the north, the center, and the east. So it is safer for certain groups than others. But on the whole, we have seen the rise of organized crime in the city, with a vacuum left by police and other judicial elements, the rule of law more generally. And there are also people coming back to their homes who find other people living there and who have lived there for the past 2.5 years, and sort of trying to prove legal status can sometimes be quite difficult because a lot of people left without having access to their deeds, particularly if they'd left them, for example, in safety deposit boxes, etc. So it's become quite a fraught context for a lot of people returning, and some who have returned to Khartoum have since left again.
I'm speaking with Kholoud Khair, who directs Confluence Advisory, a think tank focused on Sudan. Kholoud, we're more than 2 years into the civil war. We've seen Khartoum change hands. But looking at the rest of Sudan, who has the upper hand right now?
The Sudanese Armed Forces, from about September of last year, the beginning of the dry season last year, was able to make great strides in terms of recapturing not just the capital, but also central parts of the country like Jazeera and Sinnar state. And it has since translated that into greater gains in sort of the central and southwest parts of the country as well. But the two major flashpoints right now are the Kordofans regions to the southwest of the country and North Darfur, and in particular its capital, Al Fashir, where we have seen a siege for more than 500 days by the Rapid Support Forces.
Right.
Those two major military flashpoints will continue now that this year's dry season has started, and we're likely to see an escalation in both of those areas. Now, the Sudanese Armed Forces claims large victories, but the RSF has been holding firm in some of its areas. What we have seen largely is a war of attrition, particularly in the Kordofans region. Sometimes areas change hands from one day to the next, sometimes more than once.
Yeah, that's very troubling. In terms of the needs of civilians all across Sudan, how much aid is actually getting in and what's needed?
So Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. It's the world's largest hunger crisis by scale. It's the world's largest displacement crisis, and it's the world's largest protection crisis, which means that the needs are immense. More than half the population is in need of humanitarian aid, more so now because of the flooding and the dengue epidemic, as well as the malaria epidemic all across the country. A lot of people are in sort of very food insecure places. Famine has been declared in multiple hotspots, with more hotspots likely to be declared with the likely failure of the harvest season in the next month or so. So it's a very desperate situation all round. And frankly speaking, not enough effort has been made, particularly by the United Nations, to surge humanitarian aid into parts of Sudan, particularly those under RSF control.
Finally, Holud, when you speak with Sudanese, where are they investing hope in how this war ends?
Very many Sudanese that I speak to, they don't necessarily engage with processes led, for example, by the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, or otherwise. They are very much invested in their personal security on the ground, on the provision of services and support on the ground, on moves towards a ceasefire that are locally negotiated. And that's because the almost total abdication of responsibility by the international community in regards to Sudan has meant that it's local solutions that have become front and center. It is local actors that are leading on the humanitarian delivery efforts, for example, the emergency response rooms and other mutual aid groups that have taken on the lion's share of responsibility of delivering humanitarian aid. It is locally negotiated ceasefires that have held more so than internationally mediated or negotiated ceasefires. It is locals who are providing protection for each other, early warning systems, community protection mechanisms, etc. So people are really relying on themselves.
Something you just said seems really fundamental. Like, why are international players in the diplomacy space not paying more attention to what local Sudanese desires are?
Frankly speaking, the international community has been very good at ignoring Sudanese voices even before this war started. And what this war has led to is a huge exodus of international actors. So, for example, diplomatic missions all left in the first few weeks of the war. The United Nations largely left. Some United Nations agencies set up in the coastal city of Port Sudan, but very few are in touch with Sudanese people, either still in Sudan or those who have been displaced to the near abroad, for example, Chad, Egypt, South Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. But it has very much been the practice of the international community since the revolution to ignore the voice of Sudanese people. So it's been very, very difficult to try and get some of those voices to filter through. And in the vacuum that is left, you see very many, very loud partisan voices, either supporting the SAF or the RSF, come into the fore and dictate the narrative effectively. So that's something that absolutely needs to be addressed and sort of revised.
Kholoud Khair directs Confluence Advisory, a think tank founded in Sudan. She spoke with us today from Nairobi.
The International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled today that Israel must allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Since March of this year, Israel has prevented the United Nations from delivering aid to Gaza. That includes the UN refugee agency, UNRWA. The ICJ said Israel is obligated to allow that aid into the Palestinian territory. We have lots more coverage of the war in Gaza online at theworld.org.
Libraries lend books, but also all kinds of other stuff. Board games, cordless drills. Just ahead, a special library where you can borrow a person for a conversation. You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Libraries don't just lend out books. There are libraries of things where you can check out stuff like a sewing machine, telescope, or leaf blower. In Denmark, there's a lending library where you can check out actual people offered up for the purpose of conversation about their lives. The World's Joshua Coe had to learn more.
A few Sundays ago, I was at a library in Copenhagen. Unlike most libraries, the librarian here doesn't shush you. In fact, she wants to get people talking.
Were you flirting with him?
Oh, clearly.
That's because it's a human library where visitors take out people who volunteer to be open books. Here, you can chat outside with your book in the library's reading garden. At the reference desk, librarian Sif Jensen shows me a chalkboard with today's book options.
So these are all the topics that we have on the shelf today, as we say. If you see a little green mark next to them, that means that they are in conversation. They're out doing a reading right now, so those are non-available.
The books on the board include a wheelchair user and a gay parent. There's also somebody who gave up a child for adoption and another who was subjected to incest. Jensen says the book titled Transgender is a great first read. So a few minutes later, I meet my book.
Hi.
This is Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Where should we sit?
Somewhere with a bit of shade from the rain.
Rachel Dover is a 58-year-old trans woman from Glasgow in Scotland.
What we're here to do as books is to answer questions about our lived experience. So I like to say at the beginning of every reading that I do that I am a literal open book. I will answer any and all questions, and I'm not going to get offended. My whole job as a book is to not be offended. I am here to assume that the questions are coming from a good place, and it doesn't matter how they're expressed. The language doesn't matter. I'll answer them.
Dover also offers her perspective as a Jewish person, and in her 5 years as an open book, she says that there's only ever been one question that she couldn't answer.
And her question was, what gives you the right to blow up all those Palestinians? And it was such a ragingly anti-Semitic question. It triggered me good and proper. And I didn't quite know how to handle it. That's the only time I've truly been shocked by a question. If I'm asked that question again, and I have been in different ways, I reflect it back and say, well, I'm Jewish, but I've explained in my introduction that I'm British, not Israeli. Why are you trying to hold me responsible for what a foreign government does simply because I share some of the traditions and ethnicity?
Even if confrontational at times, Dover wishes more people could have conversations like the ones she's had at the Human Library.
You're welcome to have your agenda, but if you really want to learn from other people, you have to create an atmosphere where everyone can be honest and have space to make their mistakes and say things the wrong way and not pick holes in every single intonation and phrase in what someone is saying.
I will do a brief introduction to my story. There is a lot there, but then I will give the other chapters you can open if you wish, and it's up to you.
Tom Fadden's book title is Wheelchair User.
So, the beginnings of my story. At the age of 2, I was given a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. That's caused by lack of oxygen to the brain shortly after or during birth.
Fadden says that he'll answer just about any question a reader asks. But there's one question that did test his limits as an open book.
Essentially a question around, should my parents, if they knew I was disabled, should they have done something? So should I have been aborted? And that was probably the most challenging question I had, because I was like, oh, he's asking whether I should be here or not.
Fadden makes clear he thinks that question was well-intentioned, even if hurtful. He says that being a book can be just as insightful for him as it is for his readers.
Outside the library, it's made me want to understand situations more. So I hope it's made me a little bit more patient, a little bit more curious, and a little bit more understanding. I can't say I fully unjudged everyone, because we're always challenged on that, but I'm a work in progress.
And that was the idea when Ronnie Abergel founded the first human library here in Copenhagen 25 years ago. He says that he wanted people to unjudge each other, to challenge their assumptions. Today, his nonprofit, the Human Library Organization, has chapters or publishing partners in over 85 countries. including Australia, Japan, and the US.
Maybe there's less to be afraid of once we get talking to people. So sometimes it just might seem better to actually meet somebody who is trans or policeman or sex worker before you make up your mind about them.
Abergale says that he was inspired by his own experience. Growing up in Denmark with a mixed half-Danish, half-Moroccan background, he would frequently get asked questions about where he came from.
But I'm just as Scandinavian as they are, and I grew up here, and it's my country. I speak Danish, and I am part of the Danish culture. So I came up with the idea because I thought there are too many conversations it seems we can't have.
But Abergale is worried about the future of these conversations. The reading garden where we met here in Denmark is closing indefinitely.
Because we live in polarizing times, which means there isn't the same support for the type of work that we do that there was in the past.
While the Human Library is a nonprofit, only about 3% of its funding comes from donor support. Abergale tells me that the organization's mission to help improve understanding between different groups and communities translated well into diversity, equity, and inclusion training. For the longest time, U.S. companies made up the single biggest group of corporate partners for the Human Library. But Abergale says that since Donald Trump turned his rhetoric against DEI initiatives, those 200-plus corporate partners have dwindled.
And our country will be woke no longer.
Well, Abergale says he doesn't have the resources right now to keep the reading garden open. The Human Library will continue with its pop-up events at schools, at festivals, or wherever they're still welcome. For the World, I'm Joshua Coe, Copenhagen, Denmark.
You're listening to The World.
In recent decades, fewer people around the world have been taking overnight trains. But in just the past couple of years, the sleeper train has started making something of a comeback. Our transportation correspondent, Jeremy Siegel, explains.
Good morning, we're there.
We had a good trip by sleeper.
When this British Railways advertisement aired in the late 70s, the sleeper train was at the peak of its popularity. Fall asleep in one city, wake up in another at an affordable price. What could be better? But in the late 90s and early 2000s, everything changed.
Ryanair jet you from Dublin to London for £94.99 return.
Budget airlines like Ryanair began popping up, offering an even quicker and sometimes more economical alternative.
It was much more cheaper to fly throughout Europe than beforehand. So more and more people moved from the train to the planes.
Bernhard Rieder is with OBB, the National Railway Company of Austria, and says budget air travel nearly destroyed the overnight train business.
But starting from 2015-16, more and more people think about an environmental friendly travel option, and so night trains come back to the radar of the people.
According to Rieder, over the past few years, eco-conscious travelers have kickstarted a renaissance of sleeper train travel. And it's not just Austria that's seeing a boom. New overnight routes are launching across much of the globe, including in Japan, where the country's biggest rail company recently announced it's opening a new sleeper route between Tokyo and Tohoku, and in Scandinavia, where Marco Andersson, an executive at the Swedish railway Snaltuget, says they can't keep up with the number of people who want to travel by overnight train.
The demand is higher than the number of seats or the number of beds that we could offer at the moment.
Monisha Rajesh is a British-Indian journalist who grew up taking sleeper trains in India, where, unlike the rest of the world, interest in overnight travel never disappeared. The country has an expansive network that's been around for more than a century and remains one of the most popular and affordable ways of getting between cities.
Indian trains are probably the most raucous, rowdy, colorful, vibrant, stimulating sleeper trains that you will ever be on, considering you're meant to be asleep for most of it. These are trains where you've got card games going on, you've got vendors hawking up the aisles, you've got extraordinary scenery outside the window, and they are really like a microcosm of Indian society on board.
Rajesh, who's currently writing a book about her experience traveling the globe on overnight trains, says she's noticed the uptick in environmentally conscious riders in recent years. But beyond that, she thinks the resurgence of the sleeper is rooted in romance.
Sleeper trains are the essence of rail travel, because when you board a sleeper train, it's like you've all got on for a chapter in a story. All these different characters coming together with different stories, with different intentions, with different destinations as well. And people hop on and off. And when you're there for the night, you know that you've got your sleeper berth, you've got your space, you've got that night with these people.
Rajesh says she's hopeful more sleeper lines will open up in the years ahead, that the current resurgence is just the beginning of a new chapter in the story of overnight travel. And if you ask rail companies what they think, the message is clear. Full steam ahead. For The World, I'm Jeremy Siegel.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org and find our original reporting on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our new channel there. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Join us right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.